The silhouette is instantly recognizable to anyone with a passing interest in the Second World War, the MP40. But beyond its iconic status in films and games, do you know the turbulent journey that brought this Schmeisser to the battlefield? And why was it often a particular source of dread for American GIs who faced it? If that history is new to you, then we're about to uncover the real story behind this legendary firearm. To truly understand its DNA, we need to journey back to the genesis of the German submachine gun. At the dawn of the 20th century, military doctrine was dominated by the long-range bolt-action rifle. The holy trinity of military firearms was power, precision, and extreme range. Then, a new class of weapon was born from the stalemate of the First World War, a concept that stood in direct opposition to this established order. You might ask why. The answer lies in the brutal reality of trench warfare. With the advent of water-cooled machine guns and rapid-fire artillery, the old mobile style of warfare with infantry and cavalry charges collapsed into a grinding stalemate of mud, wire, and death, a horror previously unseen in history. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. For the first time, aerial reconnaissance from primitive aircraft provided real-time intelligence, making surprise maneuvers nearly impossible. The result was a labyrinth of trenches stretching across continents, with neither side able to break the deadlock. The warring factions bombarded each other relentlessly and threw wave after wave of soldiers into suicidal charges, with catastrophic losses, and no end in sight. It was in this environment that the focus shifted from feudal, large-scale assaults to small, elite raiding parties. These teams would use the cover of darkness to crawl across the shell-pocked wasteland of no man's land and infiltrate enemy lines. A meter-long, 5-shot rifle, accurate to over a kilometer, was useless in the savage, close-quarters melee of a narrow trench. The massive, water-cooled Maxim machine gun was equally impractical. Pistols offered far too little firepower. So, all nations desperately sought a new solution for this brutal new kind of fighting. The Americans answered the call with their own brutal solution, the infamous trench shotgun. But the Germans were among the first to field a more sophisticated answer, developing reliable submachine guns to arm their elite assault units. The term submachine gun itself was largely a marketing distinction to separate them from heavier, crew-served machine guns. It's widely believed the term was actually coined to make the American Thompson sound more advanced and appealing. But back to the Germans. Their first attempt involved converting standard pistols to full auto fire, but these were too light and uncontrollable. The real breakthrough came from the firm of Theodore Bergmann and his brilliant designer, Hugo Schmeisser. They developed the world's first practical submachine gun. It was designated the Maskin Pistol 18, or MP18 for short. Introduced in 1918 as a trench sweeper, it fed from a 32-round drum magazine and was chambered in 9mm, with a rate of fire between 350 and 500 rounds per minute. It was, for its time, the perfect tool for trench warfare. It saw its first major action during the German Spring Offensive of 1918, where special stormtrooper units used it to break the stalemate. They terrified Allied soldiers with a terrifying new tactic: walking fire, advancing while spraying the trenches with automatic fire. Though the offensive ultimately failed and fewer than 30,000 MP-18s were produced, they made a profound impact in the war's final months. They opened the world's eyes to the devastating potential of compact, pistol-caliber, rapid-fire weapons. From that point until the end of World War II, nearly every submachine gun design would borrow elements from Schmeisser's creation. The Italians had the peculiar Viller Perosa, essentially two machine pistols joined together for reasons that remain unclear, while the Americans fielded their famous Thompson in .45 ACP. But the end of the Great War didn't halt German innovation. They were already preparing for the rematch they knew was coming. Despite the restrictive Treaty of Versailles, German engineers continued developing weapons in secret, preparing for the next global conflict. The MP28 was introduced, replacing the complex drum magazine with a simpler straight box design. The concept was continually refined because its effectiveness was undeniable. Observing the Spanish Civil War, which Germany used as a testing ground for new tactics and hardware, they once again saw the value of submachine guns in urban combat. They were now convinced that even in a future, more mobile war, the submachine gun would remain a vital asset. In 1938, They issued a requirement for a new machine pistol, and designer Heinrich Vollmer responded with the MP38, created specifically for the Wehrmacht. Unlike earlier designs with wooden stocks, the MP38 looked almost futuristic. It was the first German submachine gun to completely abandon wood, featuring instead a folding metal stock. This made it incredibly compact for close-quarters battles, like clearing a building, or for use by the cramped crews of armored vehicles. The receiver was made from machined steel, while the foregrip and pistol grip were constructed from bakelite, an early form of plastic. While it looked sleek, this created a problem during sustained fire, as these materials conducted heat far more than wood. This is why you often see German soldiers in photos wearing gloves. They quickly learned how scorching hot the gun could get after just a few magazines. Later, a rarer variant, the MP41, was produced with a traditional wooden stock. Vollmer also wisely placed a charging handle on the left side, allowing a soldier to keep his firing hand on the grip while reloading or clearing a malfunction. It operated on a simple open-bolt blowback system and was chambered in the standard German 9mm Parabellum round, firing at roughly 500 rounds per minute. Essentially, it was the same proven MP-18 concept, but modernized and repackaged for a new era of warfare. It was immediately adopted by the German army in 1938. However, only a small number of MP-38s would see action in the initial phases of World War II, when Germany invaded Poland. Only about 8,000 were in service across the entire Wehrmacht because production was still ramping up. But they proved their worth in the new Blitzkrieg tactics. The Germans now wanted a version that could be truly mass-produced, a cheaper, simpler, yet still effective weapon. And this brings us to the icon itself, the MP40. The core mechanics remained, but the manufacturing philosophy was overhauled for speed. Expensive mill parts were replaced with stamped sheet metal components held together by spot welds wherever possible. This dramatically increased the production rate, but it wasn't without initial issues. Unsurprisingly, reports in the field indicated that early models were prone to jamming, as the hurried transition to mass production hadn't been fully optimized. Newer production models, however, quickly corrected most of these flaws. One critical flaw carried over from the MP38 was its tendency to fire accidentally if dropped or jolted, as it lacked a proper safety mechanism. The MP40 ingeniously solved this with a dual-slot safety notch. Essentially, the bolt handle could be locked in place with the bolt either open or closed, eliminating the risk of an accidental discharge if you dropped your weapon. All in all, the MP40 was mechanically very similar to its predecessor, using the same double-stack 32-round box magazines. Interestingly, the magazine design itself was patented by Hugo Schmeisser, even though he wasn't directly involved in the MP3840S development. Yet because his name was stamped on the magazines, the gun was colloquially nicknamed the Schmeisser. The German war machine was now churning out MP40S at an impressive rate, managing to reduce the production cost to 57 Reichsmarks per unit, equivalent to about $1,200 today. While still not exactly cheap, it was a bargain compared to its American counterpart. Although the Germans produced over 1 million MP40S, making it their second most produced automatic weapon after the MG34, they still manufactured over 14 million Kar 98K rifles, highlighting the rifle's continued primary role. If you compare the MP40's cost to the American Thompson, which is estimated to have cost over $2,000 in today's money, the German weapon's economy becomes clear. This cost disparity prompted the Americans to introduce the M3 grease gun, which borrowed some design cues from the MP40 and simplified the design to the extreme, lowering the cost to as little as $300 in today's currency. The British did the same with their Sten gun, which could be produced for even less, at a cost comparable to the Soviet PPSh. But we'll delve deeper into those comparisons later, when we see how they performed in combat, and why the MP40 earned its infamous reputation. It's crucial to understand the MP40's intended role on the battlefield. It was never meant to replace the standard rifle for the common infantryman. Instead, it was a specialist weapon. Early in the war, ordinary soldiers rarely saw one, as it was reserved for squad leaders, assault groups, and vehicle crews. You see, the German squad was in essence built around a single centerpiece of firepower, the machine gun, be it the MG34 or the later MG42. This weapon was operated by a three-man team, a gunner, his assistant, and an ammunition bearer, who formed the squad's killing core. Another 6 riflemen with Kar 98 KS protected this team. The squad leader, an NCO, was the sole member armed with an MP40. He typically carried 6 magazines in special pouches, along with a loading tool and a pistol as a backup. Paratroopers, logically, were among the first to be widely issued MP40s, as were Panzer divisions, where a full-length rifle was simply impractical inside a tank. But this tactical doctrine would be forced to change dramatically once the Germans clashed with the Soviet Red Army on the Eastern Front, especially during the horrific urban battles like Stalingrad. In the bombed-out ruins of those cities, where fighting was often at point-blank range, the Germans were reminded of the submachine gun's importance. But worse for them, they encountered Soviet squads armed with the PPSh-41, though hastily and crudely built. The Soviet weapon proved superior in many ways to more finely engineered German MP40, and it was being produced at a rate 6 times higher. In this kind of combat, the submachine gun was king. The situation became so dire that when the Germans couldn't get enough MP40s to their troops, they began issuing captured Soviet PPSh-41s. They went a step further, converting many to fire 9mm Parabellum instead of the Soviet 7.62 by 25mm round, creating an adapter to use MP40 magazines. Around 10,000 of these conversions were made. Even more remarkably, the Soviet PPSh could also function with German-produced 7.63 Mauser pistol ammunition, allowing them to supply captured guns without any conversion. The PPSh ironically became the second most common submachine gun in German service after the MP40 itself, used against the very nation that created it. So let's put these two titans of trench clearing side by side. The Soviet PPSh-41, chambered in 7.62 by 25mm, could achieve a blistering rate of fire of up to 900 rounds per minute. The cartridge itself was smaller, but significantly faster, giving it better penetration and effective range than the slower 9mm, though the 9mm had better stopping power. However, it was the PPSh's incredibly high rate of fire and its legendary reliability in almost any condition, thanks to its simple design, that won the day. In this type of combat, you could enter a room full of enemies, and the PPSh could turn it into a lead-laced death chamber in under 2 seconds. The MP40 simply couldn't match that kind of volume of fire. On the other hand, the MP40 was far more controllable and accurate for longer bursts. You could actually aim it, hold on a target, and empty the entire magazine into it. It also conserved ammunition far better. But in the intense close-quarters chaos of urban warfare, a higher rate of fire was often preferred, and you certainly didn't want your weapon to freeze up or jam. The MP40 weighed around 4 kilograms unloaded, which is heavy for a submachine gun, but this mass helped absorb recoil. Its effective range was about 100 meters, which was a limit for any pistol-caliber weapon. The folding stock also tended to develop wobble over time, making accurate long shots impossible. The Germans even designed an interesting MP40/2 variant that held 2 magazines side by side to reduce reload times, intended to counter the Soviet 71-round drum magazines. But only a few hundred were made, as they proved impractical in the field. Soldiers resorted to a simpler trick, taping pairs of magazines together in the jungle style for faster changes. But for all its strengths, the MP40 had a critical, well-documented Achilles heel: its magazine and feeding system. The magazine used a double-column, single-feed design. This means the 9mm rounds are stored in 2 side-by-side columns. But at the top of the magazine, these columns funnel into a single stack. Only 1 round is presented to the bolt at a time. The American Thompson, by contrast, used a double-feed design, where rounds were fed from both sides alternately. This was a far more reliable system. The MP40's design, inherited from the MP18, combined with thin steel magazines and the unclean conditions of battlefield, mud, dust, and grit, could easily cause misfeeds and jam the weapon. Experienced soldiers learned to meticulously clean and oil their magazines to ensure they functioned. Less disciplined troops would make the mistake of holding the gun by the magazine, which could bend the thin metal and cause feed failures. In fact, the German manual explicitly warns against holding the MP40 by its magazine. Soldiers in the field also learned not to load a full 32 rounds, leaving a couple out to reduce the tension on the spring and prevent feeding issues. Furthermore, these magazines were notoriously difficult to load by hand. The Germans issued a special loading tool with every MP40 to assist. It's a simple device that fits over the magazine and allows the user to press the rounds in without bruising their thumbs after loading just a few magazines. The gun itself, with its simple blowback operation, was quite reliable even in harsh environments like the African desert or the Russian winter. But those troublesome magazines caused countless headaches for German soldiers throughout the war. Allied troops generally avoided picking up and using MP40s, and in some units, it was strictly forbidden. You see, the MP40 had a very distinct sound when fired. When Allied soldiers used captured German weapons, it created chaos on the battlefield and led to numerous tragic friendly fire incidents. It's documented that during the U.S. Ranger assault on Point Du Hoc on D-Day, some Rangers picked up MP40s from fallen Germans. It was later reported that at least 4 Rangers were killed by friendly fire, found dead beside their captured German weapons. Soldiers quickly learned the danger and avoided using enemy arms unless absolutely necessary. American soldiers also preferred the superior stopping power of the .45 ACP round used in their Thompsons and M3 grease guns over the 9mm. Even though the .45 had a shorter effective range, the M3 was so simple it was nicknamed the grease gun for a reason. Unlike the thoughtful German ergonomics, it didn't even have a proper charging handle. You had to pull back on a bolt with your finger. The safety was a simple latch, and the stock was made of bent wire. The British Sten was even cheaper than the M3, and, like the MP40, was chambered in 9mm. While the Germans still centered their infantry around full-power rifles, they too recognized the value of high-capacity, rapid-fire weapons for close combat. But they struggled with the limited range of submachine guns, which is why they began searching for an intermediate cartridge. They wanted a round that was a compromise between the overkill of a full-power rifle round and the underperformance of a pistol cartridge. Something perfect for the sweet spot where most World War II combat actually occurred, under 300 meters. This search led them to the Sturmgewehr, or what we know today as the assault rifle. With its 7.92 by 33mm cartridge, the STG-44 was the first successful implementation of this revolutionary idea. It had a higher capacity than standard rifles with its 30-round magazine, offered full auto capability for close-quarters fighting, and remained effective out to around 400 meters, far beyond the reach of any submachine gun. By 1944, the STG-44 began replacing the MP40 in both production lines and tactical doctrine. The war ended before the Germans could perfect the concept of a universal assault rifle, but they still managed to produce over 400,000 of them and show the world a concept that would inspire generations of firearms to come. And doesn't it bear a striking resemblance to the AK-47, which would later become the most produced assault rifle in history? The resemblance is more than a coincidence. The German concept didn't die with the Third Reich. It was simply reborn in a new form.